Welcome to Exploring Axon, a podcast where we discuss Axon Framework, Axon Server, and their ecosystem. I am your host and the producer of this podcast, Sara. In this episode, I spoke with my colleague Mitchell, one of Axon Framework's engineers and our solutions architects. Mitchell has been leading a project we internally refer to as Inspector Axon that looks at Axon Framework applications and does several things, including inspecting it. So please do note that this name will most likely change in the future, but for the time being, this is what we're referring to it as. Mitchell also talked to me about another project that he finished last year, which is the Axon Framework IntelliJ plugin. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Mitchell, and let's have a listen. Hi, Mitchell. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me. Can you introduce yourself to everybody?
Hey Sarah, great to be on the show. I'm Mitchell Herrijgers. I am a senior solutions architect at AxonIQ, and I'm from the Netherlands.
Awesome. And you also work with the framework team as well, right?
Yeah, correct. I am
Yeah.
50% solutions architect and I am 50% Axon Framework developer. So I develop on features in the framework, and I actually also wrote the IntelliJ plugin for Axon Framework as well.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, I so want to talk to you. Well, maybe we talk a little bit about the plugin at the end too, but yeah, that's a really cool one. So tell me a little bit about your background and how did you come to know about Axon and then joining the AxonIQ team?
Yeah, that's a great question actually, because it went kind of weird. Like I don't know, 4 years ago, I was working at this consultancy company, Codecentric, and a few of my colleagues were using Axon at a project, and I was really early days Java developer back then. I just came from a PHP background,
Mm-hmm.
and they introduced me to it, and I really liked the concept of being event driven and putting your business language into your application.
Right.
A few years before that, I dropped out of school, and by the time I wanted to, well, re-enter school to get my diploma, because I can do that easily, right? So
Right.
then eventually I needed the thesis, which I decided to be about CQRS and event-driven architecture, and I used Axon Framework to do that.
Okay.
And actually, the customer that I was doing the thesis for was very happy with it, because I got to do the project in production for the Port of Rotterdam with Axon Framework, and I also got an A+ on it for at the university. So
Hey, like win-win situation right there. Right.
yeah, I couldn't complain. So then I developed that Axon Framework application for a year, and I submitted a call for paper to JFAL in the Netherlands and was selected there. And then I got a ping from Jeroen, the CEO of AxonIQ, and he was like,
Yeah.
"We need to talk sometimes." And I was like, "Okay, this is going to be about the presentation content," because I was kind
Mm-hmm.
of naive. But then I got offered to join on the Axon Framework team, and that was, well, I always dreamt of developing open source, so here I am.
Fantastic. And yeah, really great to have you in the team because you have really amazing ideas, such as the plugin and the other one that we're going to talk about for most of the conversation today, which is something that you came up with the idea and you actually developed it rather quickly. And it's very impressive just looking at it and following the sort of flow of how this idea came to be is really fascinating to me. So really glad to have you here and talk to you about it, which is this new. Not sure if I can call it product or feature. Let's say product for just to be easy. Which we actually was the name your idea or somebody else came up with the idea of calling it Inspector Axon?
I think it began as a joke during one of our company gatherings in
Mm-hmm.
Serbia, this one. And I think someone joked at Inspector Axon being the name because it inspected things like, and we all love a certain cartoon from our past. So
Yeah.
it started as a joke. And
Yeah.
well, it
It caught on. That's
it
great.
caught on. So we have decided to never name a project before its final name anything cute ever again, because
Yeah,
people
because
will
we're all
get a
attached to it.
buy-in. Yes, we are all attached to the name now, but it's not really falling into our normal product line.
Right, right. But it really suits because it does inspect what Axon does. In this case, it's more focused on Axon Framework, given that you are also more involved with the framework team. So let's talk about that a little bit and tell me, where did the inspiration come to you to basically do this project, and what does it exactly do?
All right, so I'm going to shorten a very long story because back at CodeCentric, I developed this library for Axon Framework called Axon Open Admin, which was an
Yep.
open source Spring Boot starter to stop your event processor, start your event processors, to see some statistics about them, how long a replay would still take, stuff like that. Because I found that that's a bit of plumbing in the framework that was missing.
Hmm.
But we don't provide the plumbing. Well, we as Axonic, we don't provide the plumbing because there are many situations for many customers which we cannot really control, right? Some are using
Right,
Spring, others are using Ktor, and we cannot influence all infrastructure.
right.
So I maintained this library, and last year during that same retreat, uh, or a little bit before that, Steven, the lead developer of Axon Framework, was actually like, hey, couldn't this be like one of the products of Axonic in order to kind of fill the gap between Axon Framework without all its plumbing and Axon Server? Because not
Hmm.
everyone is able or willing to run Axon Server. And
Right,
this could be a great product to actually bridge the gap.
right.
So we got from there, and then we joked about the name, and now we're near a closed beta. So
Yeah,
with
that's awesome.
Inspector,
Yeah. So you mentioned that it does a lot of the basically the plumbing that is not available out of the box for the framework for you. And you did mention sort of hints about what does your event processor do, and some of the other, for instance, annotations that we use on the framework. But it doesn't only do that. And we did come up, actually you guys did come up with the idea of inspector, kind of thinking about it. Basically looks at various parts of your application, your Axon Framework application in this case, and sort of give you a really nice overview, but not only the overview but also the flow of where the messages go. So can you explain about that and sort of give me an example of, for instance, if you have a command handler, how does that then publish the event, and then through that you get your queries and so on? How do you see that visually, but also does it kind of take you to the journey of where each handler is actually connected to another one?
yes. So within Axonic, we really like to talk about message-driven architecture, right? You have commands, you have queries, and you have events which drive the flow throughout your application, and they often have a relationship to each other because a command leads to an event, and that event can then in an event handler trigger a different query or send another command. It can be part of a saga. And so you get this flow of messages throughout your applications, perhaps through multiple microservices. And with Inspector Axon, we are measuring that flow. So we are measuring the performance of every handler and also measuring what kind of messages that handler sends. And we actually can display that for you. So you can dig into a handler, see what messages it dispatches, and then which handlers handle that dispatched message as well. So you can actually click through the flow of your whole application. And not only that, we also have a very nice force directed graph for you to visualize that. So you see all these arrows, and the arrows actually indicate the amount of messages being sent from handler to handler. So you can really grasp how your application is being used in its true environment.
One of the things that you showed through the demo, and we did have one of the listeners giving me a feedback. Hey, it would be nice to have one of these podcasts as a video podcast so we can see some visuals. And I think this would be a fantastic one to see those visuals. So, but the great news is that you're also working on a webinar to actually do show all of these visuals and kind of a demo of what it looks like later on, hopefully this month. So there is definitely that to look forward to. But one of the things that you showed, which was really cool for me to see, since I'm a very much a visual person, was that not only you can see a list of the this kind of flow that you just explained on the UI, but there's also, as you mentioned, there are these arrows. It sort of looks like a mind map in a way that you kind of go through different arrows, and there are different colored arrows. So you have one color for your commands and another for your queries and so on. And it's really cool to click on the arrows and actually get the information of, oh, this is a command handler, and this is what your command actually is named, and where does it go. So that was really, really neat. So I'd like to really congratulate you and commend you on that one, because it is so easy to follow. I really love that. So you did talk about the how it shows basically the performance of your application, but I want to kind of ask a little bit of maybe a trick question here. I don't know. Does it does the application, your application actually, will it suffer performance if you do use this inspector? Because I'm not, is it something that you have to basically mount on top of your application, or do you, where do you use it? Maybe I'm asking this too soon, but I'm impatient to know where it is.
No, no worries. So Inspector Axon works by dropping in a Maven dependency into your project, either with Spring Boot or without. And we actually instrument Axon Framework for you. So of course, with any code that's run, I cannot guarantee there's no performance impact, right? Because we
Hmm.
are measuring things. So we are also saving stuff to memory.
Hmm.
However, that performance overhead is very little, since every 10 seconds we offload those metrics to our Inspector Axon server in the cloud, where it's
Right.
stored for you for 30 days. So the performance
Mhm.
impact should be relatively small.
Okay, gotcha. So it doesn't store them forever, so you don't really have to worry about how it's going to impact long term. It's just a short term
Yes.
overview. Um, do we have plans on making this sort of a longer term overview of what's happening within your application? So, for instance, if you notice that something is being repeated or a latency is being occurred constantly through time, you can go back and look back maybe like 90 days before, or do we not have any plans at the moment?
Oh, we definitely have plans for that. So currently we have a look back of 30 days, but we
Hmm.
can always expand that because we roll up those metrics. That was actually quite fun to implement
Hmm.
because for the last 10 minutes, it's very relevant to have metrics of every 10 seconds. But if you are on day 29 of the 30-day history, you don't need per 10-second metrics anymore. It's fine to store one metric value every 3 hours, for example, for in the graph.
Right.
So we roll up those metrics and it actually doesn't cost that much data. So we can actually expand it later to 90 days.
Nice.
We also want that because yeah, in time we want to do proactive monitoring. And in order to do that,
Sure.
we need to know how your application behaves in order to see if something is wrong compared to what it
Hmm.
normally does.
Exactly. And I'm actually glad you mentioned that, because one of the ideas that you mentioned was sort of an inspiration for you to also really develop this to where it is today, is so that it can also help the developers sort of not only see where everything is going, but also uh, predict how they can actually improve their applications, right? Can you explain about that a little bit too? How does it help the developer to really understand what Axon Framework can do better for them, and how they can optimize basically the usage of their framework?
Yeah. So in its current form, Inspector Axon does not do much of that yet. We are currently
Mhm.
still in a providing insight phase. But what's really important during the development is that we have really taken care at each step to explain to the user why we are measuring this and how it
Right.
should interpret that metric, as well as we read the configuration of your application and report it in the dashboard as well. We
Mhm.
also explain why we give you an insight into these configuration values and what could go wrong there or right or better.
Right.
And in time, we actually want to advise you on improving these parameters because we, for
Right.
example, see that you have too little threads for your tracking event processor. We can see that. So we can give you a hint in order to change the configuration. And that's our
Right.
end goal, to actually detect problems before they happen.
Hmm. Yeah, which is really, I think, powerful because a lot of times finding those problems after the fact is, of course, valuable, but then going back to fixing them might be a bit of a hurdle and actually may take a long time. And especially if you have other modules, for instance, talking to it and so on, that can cause a bit of a problem. I also wanted to ask you about how Inspector Axon collects this data, and can we on Axonic side, it's kind of a maybe a security question, can we see this data from the client applications?
So the data that we collect from client applications is only performance metrics, together
Hmm.
with the message handler name and the class name in which being handled in, as well as if you configure this, you can see from our dashboard the DLQ of your event processors, which shows the event data if you want to. You don't necessarily need to enable this. Other than that data, we don't really collect any other data. We just do it based on that. Um, for the closed beta that we're running, we do have the ability to see those metrics in order to improve the product
Hmm.
as well as possible, right? We want to see all kinds of different application configurations and see how we can provide the best insights into all of them.
Right, right. But as far as any kind of sensitive data that, for instance, a user doesn't want to expose, of course, they can um, configure that as well to make sure that that data doesn't kind of leak through and be visible somewhere else that they don't want to,
Yeah,
right?
correct. We
So
don't
they
we
have
don't have
the.
access to any event content or anything like
Mhm.
that. We just have access to metrics, and those
Perfect.
include the amount of time a handler took and its median, 90th percentile, and min max values. So they're
Very
just
good.
numbers.
Excellent. Um, so you did mention a little bit about Axon Server earlier in the conversation, and I want to ask you a couple of questions on that. So, did you actually use Axon Server when you were building and developing Inspector Axon? And if so, how did you use it?
Yeah, awesome. We did use Axon Server actually because I didn't use Axon Server before I joined Axonic, right? I did it
Hmm.
on a database, and we used GMS messaging for inter-service communication and stuff like that. But during my time with Axonic, I really discovered the potential of Axon and Server as a message router, and we
Hmm.
used that for Inspector Axon. Since each client is constantly connected to our server, you can imagine that if you press pause in the dashboard, that message to pass that event processor might need to be able to go to one of our different server nodes in order
Right.
to actually send the message back through the server to actually pass the event processor on the client side. So we do that by registering command handlers in a special way, and all the routing is done for us by Axon Server, and
Hmm.
it really works wonders. Yeah,
By
it
Axon
does.
Magic. Right.
Yes, nothing is things are only magic until you understand them.
Exactly. But I'd like to highlight one little thing though, because you did say that if you pause it, then events would have to switch to another node. And um, just to be super duper clear on this, you were using Axon Server Enterprise in this case because the standard edition only uses one node, so you don't really have the option of clustering and using various nodes. Is that right?
Um, yeah, we do use Access Server Enterprise for the high
Yeah,
availability there. So
perfect.
yeah,
You did develop it using the Axon server because it really gave you really great options to be able to route messages and take care of that part of it for you. Now, will Inspector Axon work if you are not using Axon Server? And I'm assuming yes, but tell me a little bit about that and how that works.
You don't need Axon Server to actually run Inspector Axon because we want to provide these insights to everyone and just provide a pleasant experience with the framework itself. And we believe
Mhm.
that if our people are happy with the framework, they will eventually want to use it more. And because of the great message routing and event storage mechanisms Axon Server Enterprise provides, they will move there eventually. And sure, we can
Mhm.
nudge them along the way by hinting based on the amount of messages per second, how much money they could save, for example.
Right.
But that's
Right.
not the main goal. The main goal is to provide a pleasant experience and to prevent developers from making mistakes with the framework, which will in turn keep developers happy, right? And
Right.
that's the most
Exactly.
important part for me. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, which is an amazing motivation because anytime I feel like anytime you build something and you develop something, you want your users to have a smooth and nice experience throughout the way. So I think that's a fantastic goal to have. And I think once you do the webinar and folks see how it actually works and visually kind of look at it and find out about the flow and things, um, yeah, I think they will be pleasantly surprised at how well it does things, which is really great. Um, so, with that said, you did say that yes, if it makes sense for the users to basically pair it up with Axon Server, that's great, but they don't have to. Um, is it does it in any way make Axon Server obsolete, or does it have nothing to do with it?
No, it does not make Axon Server obsolete. It's an addition on Axon Framework in the sense that it monitors the application and provides you with actionable things in order to improve the situation.
Mhm.
And Axon Server is a storage mechanism. We have no intention of being such a storage or message routing mechanism. So you can also use it with Axon Server. Actually, we would rather have you do that, of course. And
Mhm.
eventually, so Inspector Axon is the kickoff for a much larger move to integrating like the Axonic Cloud, Inspector Axon, and new Axon server stuff into one platform eventually. So first we're
Yeah.
going to start off with the code name Inspector Axon Beta and then move more stuff into it, providing
Mhm.
more of one stop experience for everything Axon related, whether that's with Axon Server on premise, whether that's with Axon Server on our Axon cloud, or whether you're still running a Mongo database.
Mhm. Exactly. Very good. So we did talk about all of the stories that ended with a happy ending. So far, but I want to also ask you about any challenges that you may have had along the way, uh, in well developing and also improving this project that you had started a long time ago. That's now turned into this fantastic project we call Inspector Axon. What kind of challenges did you face and how did you overcome those challenges?
So, because we are developing this with the Axon Framework team, together with Steve and Gerard and me in the lead, because I'm the originator of the idea, I spent the most time on it. But because we have so much knowledge in the team, the challenge was not actually Axon Framework related, right? We develop on the core of the framework, we know how it works, and we know how to interpret the data. The difficult part was actually being able to handle that insane amount of data
Mm,
because we're getting processor metrics every second from every application connected to it. And we're receiving a metric for every handler every 10 seconds connected to it. And each metric has five different values: the min, the max, the median, the ninja. It's a lot of data. So
yeah.
our biggest challenge was actually how to handle the data for a SaaS product, and that
Hmm.
we want to have thousands, if not millions, of users eventually.
Right.
And then you really need to compress your data and think about how you store them efficiently. It was a fun challenge. I worked on that for a few weeks because it's a lot of data. Our Axon
Yeah.
Framework application for Inspector Axon, because that's based on Axon Framework as well, I think it contains about 80 handlers. So that's 80 handlers every 10 seconds. We have 8 processors across 3 nodes, which makes it 24 metrics a second. And that's just for one of our applications.
Yeah.
I know of customers which have 97 microservices connected to their Axon Server Enterprise.
Yeah.
And if they are going to monitor everything of it, we are going to have a lot of data.
Yeah.
So that's actually why we are first doing a closed beta as well. So we can select small and large customers and verify that we have built the most performant solution, or might need to change our strategy, right? So
Absolutely.
that's I love a challenge like that because it's kind of like Datadog, but with the
Mhm.
or any other monitoring product like New
Mhm.
Relic, or but then with a semantic understanding of your Axon Framework application. And
Right.
that's what makes it really cool because Datadog or New Relic doesn't understand that if your command took a second, that it could
Mhm.
have been loading events for 800 milliseconds. But that's then where the performance problem is. And we know that. We can show that
Right.
to you in a graph because we collect
Mhm.
this amount of data.
Yeah, which is really, really neat because you're actually kind of dissecting the application and figuring out what is wrong with various points, and you can really pinpoint to the problem area or problem areas and fix those, as opposed to thinking, oh, as a whole, why is it
Oh,
performing yeah, suboptimal and so on. So really neat. I'm and really excited to see it in action and find out how where it goes and how it's developed later on. You did talk about closed beta. As my last question, where can people find it? Do they need to sign up for it? Where do I sign up? Basically.
so watch closely on our social media channels because we will be sharing a closed beta sign up page soon where you
Hmm.
can sign up for the beta. And when we feel like we are ready for you, or you are an interesting application for our landscape during the closed beta, we will invite you. And if by
Fantastic.
the time we go into open beta, we haven't invited you yet, you will, of course, receive an invitation in order to sign up.
Wonderful. Really exciting stuff, Mitchell. Thank you. Before I close the whole conversation, I wanted to also ask you, because you did mention the plugin at the beginning, and a while ago, you and I were talking about doing maybe a small session about the plugin. Can you can you tell everybody a little bit about the plugin, because I think it's such a fantastic tool to have.
Yeah, so during my development on Axon Framework application at the Port of Rotterdam and other venues or companies, I mean, there was always this problem of finding every place a message was being dispatched or a message was being handled.
Hmm.
Because you could right click on a class and see defined usages and then classify that in your head and see what's a dispatcher and a handler. But an IntelliJ plugin can process so much more. So that's actually why I started the plugin. And that was actually the first thing I developed when I joined Axonic last year. Or actually,
Hmm.
I started developing before I joined Axonic because I was excited and I thought
Yeah.
this was one of our shortcomings. So I thought this was where the developer experience could really be improved. And that's what I really
Hmm.
like to do. So the developing the IntelliJ plugin, it was awesome, sometimes frustrating because it was something tough that I never did before, right? It's not like you're writing
Yeah.
business logic, you're interpreting IDE data. It's
Mhm.
a lot different, but it was really fun to do. And I hope people are enjoying it.
Yes, absolutely. Can you give me a simple example of when you look at the plugin? Again, it's more of a visual as well, which I hope at some point we do a short video on it and to really show folks what it does. But can you kind of because I know it plays on the Axon Framework logo, which is which is really cool. And sometimes you have arrows pointing at, for instance, a handler. Sometimes you have arrows pointing out of it. Can you tell me a little bit about those maybe small points? Because I think that's kind of easy to visualize without really seeing it.
Yeah, so you mean like the left part of the triangle and then the dot in the middle, right?
Yes,
That
yes,
shoots
yes,
out.
yes.
So if it
Mm-hmm.
shoots a pill out as a sort of a square Pac-Man like thing,
Yeah.
it's actually it dispatches a message and reverse it handles a message. At
Yeah.
first, we had quite different icons, and I played around with all kinds of styles like I was a visual designer. I think I spent quite a few days on that actually.
Yeah, I can
I've
imagine.
all I've also had so currently we have one color for all messages. At some
Mhm.
point, I had different colors for different messages. I had green for queries and blue for commands. But the
Okay.
IDE started, yeah, the IDE started to look like a Christmas tree. So it was not visually pleasing at all. So that was
I can
quickly
imagine.
reverted. Yeah.
It's really cool though because we actually just did a I did a workshop with Allard just last week in Houston, and he was doing a demo, and folks actually did ask about, hey, what are those arrows? And he said, oh, this is the IntelliJ plugin, and they actually asked about it, and the conversation started from that. So it's cool, and yeah, people were really interested to find out more about it. So I think we should do a video on this at some point soon. But yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for the really quick recap of the IntelliJ plugin. I know it took you a long time to really develop it to where it is now. And thank you for that because it does make people's lives easier. But hopefully, we'll come back and talk a bit more about it. Again, thanks so much for joining me and talking about this wonderful project, Inspector Axon, and also the plugin. Good luck with the release, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you to Sarah. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to my talk with Mitchell. I hope you enjoyed it. Please join me next time for other amazing conversations with wonderful guests. Until then, have a great time and happy coding!